The bus dropped me at a gravel turnout 3 miles from the store. No shelter, no bench, just a faded sign for Route 119 and the smell of rain coming down from the hills. I had a duffel bag with 2 changes of clothes, a phone with 12% battery, and a printout of the job offer from Walmart store 4412, Harlan County, Kentucky. Night inventory specialist, $11.40 an hour. Full benefits after 90 days. I needed every one of those days. I walked the shoulder of the 2-lane blacktop as the sun dropped behind Pine Mountain. The store appeared after the second bend, a concrete rectangle set back from the road, parking lot half empty, lights already buzzing in the purple dusk. It looked like every other Walmart I'd ever seen, which was the point. Ordinary, predictable, a place where nothing unusual could afford to happen. The assistant manager met me at the customer service desk. Her name was Deborah, and she had the look of someone who had worked nights for 15 years and stopped questioning why around year 3. She handed me a locker key, a navy blue vest, a name badge, and a 2-way radio already tuned to Channel 4. "You're on with Marcus tonight," she said. "He's been here longer than anyone. He'll show you the floor, the stock room, the loading dock. Listen to what he says. Don't improvise." I asked about the employee handbook. Deborah paused, then pulled a laminated sheet from beneath the counter. It was letter-sized, single-spaced, the text small enough to require focus. "This is the night shift protocol," she said. "Read it before the store closes at 10. Memorize what you can. If something doesn't make sense, do it anyway. Ask Marcus after." She left me at the break room table with a cup of vending machine coffee and the laminated sheet. The header read, "Store 44 Tweed. Overnight procedures, revised." Below that, numbered rules in a plain serif font. I read them twice. 1. Clock in no earlier than 9:45 p.m. and no later than 9:55 p.m. If you are late, do not enter the building. Return home and call the store hotline at 6 a.m. 2. Verify that your radio is set to Channel 4. Do not change channels under any circumstances. If you hear a broadcast on a channel you did not select, turn the radio off for 60 seconds, then turn it back on and confirm Channel 4. 3. The store closes to customers at 10 p.m. Do not unlock any exterior door after 10:15 p.m. until 5:45 a.m. This includes the garden center gate, the tire and lube bay, and the pharmacy side entrance. 4. Between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., the public restrooms are off limits. Use only the employee restroom near the loading dock. If you hear knocking from inside a closed restroom, do not respond and do not investigate. 5. Inventory the stockroom at midnight, 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Count pallets, not boxes. Record the number on the clipboard by the dock door. If the count decreases by more than 2 between any check, radio Marcus immediately. If the count increases, leave the stockroom and radio Marcus from the sales floor. 6. Between 1:40 a.m. and 1:55 a.m., remain in the center aisles of the store. Do not approach any exterior wall, window, or door. Do not look toward the parking lot. 7. If the power fails, go directly to the manager's office. Close the door. Wait for the generator to engage. Do not leave until the lights return. 8. The garden center greenhouse is locked from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Do not attempt to enter. Do not approach the glass. If you see someone inside the greenhouse after hours, do not acknowledge them. 9. Stock shelves in numerical aisle, order only. Aisle 1 through aisle 22. Do not skip aisles. Do not backtrack. If you reach aisle 22 before 3:30 a.m., return to the stockroom and wait. 10. Between 3 a.m. and 3:20 a.m., the overhead lights in the grocery section will flicker. This is normal. Do not attempt to fix or report it. 11. If a customer approaches you after 10 p.m., do not assist them. direct them to the front registers and radio Deborah. If they do not leave within 2 minutes, go to the manager's office and wait. 12. Do not accept any item handed to you by someone you do not recognize as a scheduled employee. This includes delivery drivers, cleaning contractors, and anyone wearing a Walmart vest without a visible name badge. 13. The loading dock door must remain closed unless a scheduled delivery arrives. Deliveries occur only on Tuesdays and Fridays. Tonight is Wednesday. 14. At 5:30 a.m., Marcus will announce "clear floor" over the radio. Respond with "copy clear." Do not leave the building until you hear this phrase and speak the response aloud. I set the sheet down and checked my watch. 9:32 p.m. The coffee was cold. The store speakers played a country song from 10 years ago, the kind with a steel guitar and lyrics about losing someone on a back road. Through the break room window, I could see the last customers filtering toward the registers, their carts half empty, their faces lit by phone screens. I memorized what I could. At 9:47 p.m., I clocked in at the time clock near the loading dock. The machine beeped once, printing my timestamp on a narrow slip of paper. Marcus was already there, leaning against a stack of shrink-wrapped pallets, a radio clipped to his belt, and a flashlight in his vest pocket. He was maybe 55, with a gray beard and hands that looked like they'd spent decades on loading docks and factory floors. "You read the sheet," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." "Good." He handed me a second flashlight. "Tonight's about watching, staying in the right places at the right times. Most of it's boring, all of it matters." I wanted to ask why. Why the restroom rule? Why the inventory counts? Why the specific window between 1:40 and 1:55? But Marcus was already walking toward the sales floor, and I understood that this was not a job where you ask questions on your first night. The store closed at 10. I watched Deborah escort the last 3 customers out through the main entrance, then lock the sliding doors with a key from her lanyard. The lights in the vestibule went dark. The parking lot emptied down to 6 cars, employees I assumed, scattered across the front row. At 10:15, Marcus walked the perimeter of the store, checking each exterior door. I followed 3 steps behind, noting the sequence: main entrance, garden center gate, tire bay, pharmacy side door, loading dock. Each one locked, each one tested with a firm push. He didn't explain, he just checked. "Stockroom at midnight," he said when we finished. "Grocery section first, aisle 1, cereal." I nodded and went to work. The first hours passed without incident. I stocked cereal boxes in aisle 1, canned vegetables in aisle 2, pasta and rice in aisle 3. The work was physical and repetitive, the kind of labor that lets your mind wander if you're not careful. I kept checking my watch instead. At 11 p.m., I verified that the public restrooms were closed, yellow, out of service signs on both doors, the kind you'd expect during a cleaning. I used the employee restroom near the dock. It was small, single occupancy, with a lock that latched from the inside. Nothing unusual. At 11:48 p.m., I heard the knocking. It came from the women's restroom at the front of the store. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, like someone tapping on a door they expected to open. I was in aisle 7, canned soups, about 40 yards from the sound. I stopped moving. The knocking came again. 3 more taps, a little slower this time. Rule 4. If you hear knocking from inside a closed restroom, do not respond and do not investigate. I stayed where I was. The knocking stopped after the second set. I finished aisle 7 and moved to aisle 8. My hands were steady, but my pulse had climbed. At midnight, I went to the stockroom for the first inventory count. The space was large, maybe 80 yards deep, 30 yards wide, lined with metal shelving units and stacked pallets of merchandise. The clipboard hung on a nail by the dock door. The previous count, logged at some earlier shift, read 19 pallets. I counted 19 pallets. I wrote it down. Marcus was at the far end of the stockroom, checking the seal on the loading dock door. The seal was a strip of industrial tape, bright yellow, stretched across the gap between the door and the frame. If the tape was intact, the door hadn't been opened. It was intact. 19, I said. Good. He didn't look up. I returned to the sales floor and continued stocking. Aisle 9, aisle 10, aisle 11. The overhead lights buzzed at a frequency just below conscious awareness. The store speakers had switched to instrumental music, soft and vaguely familiar, like something you'd hear in an elevator, designed by someone who wanted you to forget where you were. At 1:35 a.m., Marcus radioed me. Center aisles in 5. Don't be late. I was in aisle 14, household cleaners. I shelved the last bottle of dish soap and walked toward the middle of the store. The center aisles were 10 through 13, a block of territory that didn't touch any exterior wall. Marcus was already there, standing at the end of aisle 11, facing inward. 1:40, he said, checking his watch. Stay here. Don't look at the windows. I didn't look at the windows. For 15 minutes, we stood in the center of the store. I could hear things outside, not clearly, not distinctly, but enough to know something was moving. Footsteps, maybe. A cart rolling across asphalt. The creak of the garden center gate, which I knew was locked. I kept my eyes on the shelves. Laundry detergent, fabric softener, dryer sheets in lavender and original scent. At 1:55, Marcus said, "Clear." We went back to work. The 2 a.m. inventory count showed 19 pallets, same as before. I wrote it down and returned to stocking. Aisle 15, aisle 16. My arms ached from lifting cases of bottled water and canned goods. I checked my watch every few minutes, counting down to the end of the shift, counting down to dawn. At 2:40 a.m., I heard a voice. It came from somewhere near the front of the store, a woman's voice, calm and conversational, like she was talking to someone just out of sight. I was in aisle 17, pet food, about 60 yards from the registers. The voice was too far away to make out words, but the tone was friendly, casual. The store had been closed for nearly 5 hours. No customers should have been inside. I radioed Marcus. "There's someone talking near the front, female voice." His response was immediate. "Do not approach. Stay in your aisle. I'll handle it." I stayed in aisle 17. I shelved bags of dry cat food and tried not to listen to the voice, which continued for another 3 minutes before stopping. Marcus didn't radio back. At 3 a.m., the overhead lights in the grocery section flickered, just like the rules said they would. And I stood still in the pet food aisle, counting the seconds until they stabilized. 38 seconds of irregular light, then steady again. Rule 10, this is normal. The 4 a.m. inventory count showed 19 pallets, unchanged. By 4:30, I had finished stocking through aisle 22. The rules said to return to the stockroom and wait if I finished early. So I did. The space was quiet and cold, lit by industrial fluorescence that cast a flat, shadowless light. I sat on an overturned crate near the dock door and watched the yellow tape on the seal. At 5:15, I heard footsteps outside the dock door. They were slow and measured, the way someone walks when they're checking windows or testing locks. The sound moved from left to right across the length of the door, maybe 20 feet of travel, then stopped. I didn't move. The footsteps started again, this time from right to left, retracing the same path. Then they stopped. I checked the tape, still intact. At 5:30, Marcus's voice came over the radio. "Clear floor." "Copy clear," I said aloud. Marcus met me at the time clock. The sun was just visible through the high windows near the loading dock, a thin line of orange on the eastern hills. Deborah was unlocking the main entrance, preparing for the 6 a.m. opening. The store looked exactly as it had the night before. clean, stocked, ordinary. "You did fine," Marcus said. "Same time tomorrow." I clocked out at 5:42 a.m. and walked to the parking lot. My car was where I'd left it, in the back row near the garden center. The morning air was cool and smelled like pine and wet asphalt. I sat in the driver's seat for 10 minutes, letting the sun warm the windshield, before I started the engine and drove to the motel where I was staying. I slept until 3 in the afternoon. The second week was when things started to test me. I had settled into the rhythm by then, the clock-in window, the aisle sequence, the center aisle protocol, the inventory counts. My body adjusted to sleeping during the day and working through the night. I learned the layout of the stockroom, the location of every fire extinguisher, the sound of the HVAC system cycling on and off. I stopped questioning the rules and started treating them like weather. You didn't ask why it rained, you just brought an umbrella. On my 8th shift, Marcus handed me a second laminated sheet. This one was smaller, index card sized, with 6 additional rules typed below the header amendments, effective immediately. "Read these," he said. "Memorize by tomorrow." I read them while eating a granola bar in the break room. 15. Do not respond to any radio transmission that addresses you by your full name. Respond only to badge number or shift role. 16. If you see a shopping cart in the parking lot after midnight, do not retrieve it. Carts retrieved after midnight must be inventoried separately and stored in the garden center until dawn. 17. The ceiling tiles above, aisle 19, are scheduled for replacement. Do not stand directly beneath them between midnight and 4 a.m. If you must pass through aisle 19, walk along the right side only. 18. Any employee who has not been seen by another employee for more than 45 minutes should be located via radio before being approached. Confirm their position before making physical contact. 19. Between 2 a.m. and 2:30 a.m., the electronic price scanners at the registers may activate spontaneously. Do not investigate. Do not approach the registers during this window. 20. If you hear a child's voice anywhere in the store after closing, do not respond. Do not attempt to locate the source. Radio Marcus immediately and proceed to the manager's office. I looked up from the card. Marcus was watching me from the doorway. "Why these rules?" I asked. "Because the old ones weren't enough." He left before I could ask anything else. That night, I heard the child's voice for the first time. It was 2:14 a.m. I was in the stockroom, finishing the second inventory count. 18 pallets, 1 fewer than normal, which I noted on the clipboard without alarm, because Rule 5 only required immediate radio contact if the count dropped by more than 2. The voice came from somewhere near the front of the store, small and high, the way a child sounds when they're calling for a parent they can't find. "Hello, is someone there?" I put down the clipboard. My hand went to the radio. "Marcus, I'm hearing a child's voice near the front, radioing per Rule 20. Copy. Stay where you are. Office now." I walked to the manager's office. The door was already open. Marcus must have unlocked it earlier, and I stepped inside and pulled it shut behind me. The office was small and windowless, with a metal desk, 2 chairs, and a wall of filing cabinets. I sat in the chair nearest the door and listened. The voice continued for another 11 minutes. It moved through the store in a pattern I couldn't follow, sometimes near the registers, sometimes in the grocery section, sometimes so close to the office door that I could have reached out and touched whoever was speaking. But I didn't open the door. I didn't respond. At 2:27 a.m., the voice stopped. Marcus radioed me at 2:35. "Clear. Resume work." I finished the shift without incident. At the 5:30 check-in, I asked Marcus about the voice. "Happens sometimes," he said. "Used to happen more. That's why we added Rule 20. "What is it?" He looked at me for a long moment. His eyes were steady, but tired. the kind of tired that goes deeper than sleep. "Don't know," he said. "Don't need to know. The rules keep it out. That's what matters." I didn't ask again. The third week brought the trainee. His name was Kyle, and he'd been hired for the same role I was filling, night inventory specialist, second position. The store had been operating with just Marcus and me for the past month, but corporate wanted 2 full-time night staff, plus the supervisor. Kyle was 23, fresh out of a warehouse job in Lexington, and he talked too much. "So what's with all the rules?" he asked on his first night while we were stocking aisle 4. "Like, I get safety protocols, but some of this stuff is weird. Don't look at the parking lot. Don't go in the bathroom. Feels like a hazing thing." "It's not hazing," I said. "Just follow the rules." "But why? What happens if you don't?" I didn't have an answer. Or rather, I had an answer I didn't want to give. Because the truth was that I'd never seen what happened when you broke a rule. I'd only seen what happened when you followed them. And following them had kept me safe for 3 weeks. "Just follow the rules," I said again. Kyle shrugged and went back to stocking canned corn. On his third night, he broke Rule 6. I was in the stockroom at 1:42 a.m., waiting for the center aisle window to pass. Kyle was supposed to be with me. We'd been stocking together in aisle 9 when the time approached. But when I turned to tell him to move, he wasn't there. I radioed him. "Kyle, it's 1:43. Get to center aisles now." No response. I radioed again. "Kyle, respond. Badge number 7412. Static, then his voice. "Yeah, I'm just checking something at the front. Thought I saw someone in the parking lot. Be there in a sec." My stomach dropped. "Kyle, do not approach the windows. Do not look at the parking lot. Get to center aisles immediately." "Dude, relax. There's nothing out." His voice cut off. I waited. 1:45 a.m., 1:47 a.m. The radio was silent. At 1:55 a.m., when the window closed, I walked to the front of the store. The overhead lights were steady. The registers were dark. The parking lot, visible through the main entrance doors, was empty. Kyle was standing at the end of aisle 2, facing the cereal shelves. His back was to me. His hands were at his sides. He wasn't moving. "Kyle?" He didn't respond. I approached slowly, stopping 10 feet away. His posture was wrong. Too straight, too still, like someone standing at attention for an inspection that would never end. I circled around to see his face. His eyes were open. His expression was blank. He was breathing. I could see his chest rise and fall, but there was no recognition in his face. No awareness, like the part of him that made decisions had stepped out and hadn't come back. I radioed Marcus. "Something's wrong with Kyle. Front of the store, aisle 2. He's unresponsive." Marcus arrived in under 2 minutes. He took one look at Kyle and pulled out his phone. "I'm calling Deborah. Don't touch him. Don't talk to him. Wait in the office." I waited in the office. At 3:12 a.m., Deborah arrived through the loading dock. She and Marcus spent 40 minutes with Kyle while I sat in the manager's chair and stared at the wall. At 3:54 a.m., I heard a car door slam in the parking lot. An ambulance, I later learned, though I didn't see it. Kyle was transported to a hospital in London, Kentucky, about 40 miles north. I never saw him again. At the 5:30 check-in, Marcus gave me a new sheet, 3 rules typed in bold. Emergency protocols. Active as of tonight, 21. If a staff member becomes unresponsive during the center aisle window, do not approach until the window has closed. Radio the supervisor immediately. Do not attempt physical contact for at least 15 minutes after the window ends. 22. In the event of a power failure lasting more than 90 seconds, proceed to the emergency supply cabinet in the manager's office. Retrieve the battery-powered lantern, the hand crank radio, and the sealant tape. Seal the gap beneath the office door using 3 complete strips of tape. Do not leave the office until power is restored. 23. If the store radio system broadcasts a message in a voice you do not recognize, turn off your personal radio immediately. Wait 60 seconds, turn it back on and confirm channel 4. If the unrecognized voice continues, proceed to the manager's office and seal the door. Do not respond to any broadcast until morning. I folded the sheet and put it in my vest pocket. What happened to Kyle? I asked. Marcus looked out the high window near the loading dock. The sun was rising over Pine Mountain, pink and gold through the morning haze. He looked at the parking lot, he said. That's all I know. Kyle didn't come back. Corporate sent a notice that he'd taken medical leave, then another notice that he'd transferred to a day shift at a store in Ohio. I never confirmed either story. I just stopped expecting to see him. The fourth week was quiet, or what passed for quiet, at store 4412. I heard the knocking every night around 11:30, always from the women's restroom, always 3 taps followed by silence. I saw the shopping carts appear in the parking lot after midnight, 2 or 3 at a time, clustered near the garden center gate, as if someone had pushed them there from inside. I walked the center aisles during the 1:40 window and kept my eyes on the shelves. I counted pallets at midnight, 2 a.m., and 4 a.m. The numbers held steady at 18. On the 26th night, the power went out. It happened at 2:41 a.m. I was in aisle 16, automotive supplies, shelving bottles of motor oil. The lights cut without warning. A hard blackout, no flicker, no warning hum from the HVAC. Just darkness. I had a flashlight. I turned it on and headed for the manager's office. The walk took longer than it should have. The store was only about 120 yards from end to end, and the office was near the loading dock, maybe 80 yards from aisle 16. But the darkness changed the distances somehow. I counted my steps, 50, 60, 70. I should have reached the back wall by then. I kept walking. At step 93, my flashlight beam hit the office door. I went inside and closed the door behind me. The emergency supply cabinet was a metal locker in the corner, padlocked with a combination Marcus had given me on my second week. 4412, the store number. I opened it and retrieved the items: a battery lantern, a hand crank radio, and a roll of yellow sealant tape. I tore off 3 strips and pressed them over the gap beneath the door. Then I sat down and waited. The darkness outside the office was not silent. I could hear things moving, footsteps maybe, or the soft scrape of something being dragged across the floor. The sound circled the office in a slow, deliberate pattern, around and around. I counted the circuits. 1, 2, 3, 4. After the 7th circuit, the sound stopped. At 3:19 a.m., the power came back. The lights in the office flickered twice, then held. I pulled the tape from beneath the door and stepped out into the hallway. The store looked exactly as it had before. Clean, fully lit, completely ordinary. Nothing had moved. Nothing was out of place. Marcus radioed me at 3:22. "You okay?" "Yeah, I was in the office. Sealed the door. Power came back." "Good." A pause. "How many circuits?" "What?" "The footsteps. How many times did they go around?" I thought about lying. I thought about saying I hadn't heard anything. But Marcus had been doing this job for longer than I'd been alive, and lying to him felt pointless. 7, I said. Another pause. That's more than usual. He didn't elaborate. I didn't ask. The 5:30 check-in was brief. Marcus handed me a new sheet, a single rule, handwritten on notebook paper. 24. During a power failure, if the circling footsteps exceed 10 circuits, do not unseal the door when the power returns. Remain in the office until dawn. Someone will retrieve you. I put the paper in my pocket and clocked out. I didn't sleep well that day. I lay on the motel bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about the footsteps. 7 circuits. 10 was the threshold. What happened at 11? 12? What was counting them, and why did it matter? I thought about quitting. I had enough saved for a bus ticket back to Cincinnati, where I'd been living before the debt got too heavy and the options got too narrow. But Cincinnati meant creditors and court dates, and the slow grind of a life I'd already failed at once. Harlan County meant $11.40 an hour and rules that kept me alive. I went back to work. The 5th week was when I met the woman in the garden center. It was 1:23 a.m. on a Wednesday. I was walking the perimeter, checking seals on the exterior doors, when I passed the garden center gate. The gate was locked. It was always locked after 10. But through the chain link, I could see movement inside the greenhouse. Rule 8 was clear. If you see someone inside the greenhouse after hours, don't acknowledge them. I kept walking, but the movement resolved into a shape, and the shape resolved into a woman. She was standing near the rows of potted plants, facing the glass, watching me. Her clothes were normal: jeans, a gray sweater, sneakers. Her face was calm, almost friendly. She raised one hand in a slow wave. I looked away. I kept walking. At 1:26 a.m., I heard her voice. "Excuse me, sir? I think I got locked in. Can you let me out?" The voice was clear, not muffled by glass, not distant. It sounded like she was standing right beside me. But I was 30 yards from the greenhouse by then, almost to the loading dock. I didn't respond. I didn't look back. At 1:29, I was inside the stockroom. The voice had stopped. I did the 1:30 inventory count, 17 pallets, one fewer than before, still within acceptable range, and returned to the sales floor. I didn't look toward the garden center for the rest of the night. At the 5:30 check-in, I told Marcus about the woman. He nodded slowly. What did she look like? 30s maybe, brown hair, gray sweater. She waved at me. Did she say your name? No, just asked me to let her out. Marcus exhaled. Good. Don't go near that side of the store tonight. I'll check the greenhouse at dawn. What's in there? He didn't answer. He just handed me the clipboard with the shift log and walked toward the loading dock. I never saw the woman again, but I thought about her sometimes, standing in the greenhouse at 1 a.m, waving at a stranger through the glass, asking to be let out in a voice that carried 30 yards without effort. I wondered who she'd been before. I wondered if there was a rule I hadn't learned yet, a rule about what happened when you acknowledged her. When you looked back, I followed the rules. That's what mattered. The 6th week was the longest night. A storm system moved into the county on Thursday afternoon, the kind of late fall weather that drops the temperature 20 degrees in 2 hours and fills the sky with clouds the color of wet concrete. By the time I clocked in at 9:48 p.m., the wind was rattling the garden center gate, and the parking lot lights were swaying on their poles. Deborah was at the front desk, her expression tighter than usual. Power might go out tonight, she said. You've got the emergency protocols? Yes, ma'am. Good. Marcus has extra lanterns in the stockroom. Stay sharp. The store closed at 10. The last customers, maybe a dozen of them, hurried out into the rain, clutching plastic bags and hunching against the wind. Deborah locked the main entrance and headed to her car. By 10:15, the parking lot was empty except for my Civic and Marcus's truck. The storm hit full force around 11. I was in aisle 5, canned fruits and vegetables, when the lights flickered for the first time. Just a quick pulse, on, off, on, but enough to make me stop and check my watch. 11:07. Too early for the scheduled flicker in grocery. Too late for a simple power surge. I radioed Marcus. Lights flickered in aisle 5. Saw it from the dock. Storm's messing with the grid. Stay on protocol. I stayed on protocol. At 11:30, The knocking started. 3 taps from the women's restroom, same as always. But tonight, there was a second sound. A low thudding from somewhere near the back of the store, rhythmic and heavy, like someone pounding on a door with their fist. Rule 3. Do not unlock any exterior door after 10:15 p.m. until 5:45 a.m. The thudding continued, 18 impacts before it stopped. At 11:42, the power went out. This time, the darkness was different. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was the absence of everything. The hum of the refrigerators, the whisper of the ventilation, the white noise of a functioning building. All gone. The only sounds were the rain on the roof and the wind against the walls and my own breathing, too loud in the sudden silence. I turned on my flashlight and headed for the manager's office. The walk felt longer than before. I counted my steps again, 50, 60, 70, and tried not to think about the last blackout, the circuits around the office, the question Marcus had asked. How many times did they go around? At step 88, I passed the entrance to the garden center. The gate was still locked. Through the chain link, I could see the greenhouse dark and shapeless in the rain. Something was standing inside. I didn't stop. I didn't look. I kept walking. At step 106, I reached the office. I went inside, closed the door, and sealed the gap with 3 strips of tape. The battery lantern cast a circle of yellow light on the desk and floor. The hand crank radio crackled with static when I turned it on. I sat down and waited. The footsteps started at 11:59. Slow, deliberate, circling the office in a pattern I now recognized. I counted the circuits. 1, 2, 3. The storm outside was a dull roar, but the footsteps cut through it, clear and close, as if whoever was walking was only inches from the door. 4 circuits, 5 circuits. At the 6th circuit, the footsteps stopped. Something scraped against the office door. A slow, deliberate pressure, like a hand testing the surface. I didn't move. The scraping continued for 11 seconds. Then it stopped. The footsteps resumed. 7 circuits. 8. At the 10th circuit, the lights came back. I waited. Rule 24 said 10 was the threshold. The footsteps had reached 10, but I'd sealed the door and the power had returned before they exceeded that number. I decided to wait anyway, better cautious than sorry. At 12:14 a.m., Marcus radioed me. You in the office? Yeah, sealed the door at 11:43. Power came back at 12:03. Footsteps reached 10 circuits. 10 exactly? Yes. A long pause. Stay there for another 30 minutes. I'll come get you. I stayed. At 12:46, Marcus knocked on the office door. 3 short taps, then 2 long, a pattern he'd taught me on my second week. I pulled off the tape and let him in. We need to do a full inspection, he said. Generator kicked in eventually, but we lost about 20 minutes of total blackout. That's the longest since I've been here. We walked the store together. The sales floor was intact. Shelves upright, products in place, no visible damage. The restrooms were closed, yellow signs still in place. The loading dock seal was unbroken. The garden center gate was locked. But when we reached the greenhouse, Marcus stopped. Stay here, he said. He walked to the glass wall of the greenhouse and shone his flashlight inside. I watched from 20 feet back, keeping my eyes on his shoulders, not on what he was seeing. He stood there for about 90 seconds. Then he turned around and walked back to me. There's a new pot, he said. Front row near the entrance. Empty. Wasn't there yesterday. What does that mean? He shook his head slowly. Don't know, but something's been planting things. At the 1 a.m. window, we did the center aisle protocol together. Marcus stood at my shoulder the entire time, both of us facing the shelves, neither of us looking toward the walls or windows. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle. The lights were steady. Nothing approached. At 1:55, Marcus said, "Clear." We went back to work. But the night felt heavier now. Every sound, the creak of the building, the hum of the refrigerators, the distant groan of the wind, felt like a test, a question waiting to be answered wrong. At the 2 a.m. inventory count, the number had changed. I stared at the pallets for a long moment, counting twice to make sure. 16 pallets. The previous count had been 17, a drop of 1, still within acceptable range. But the previous night had been 18, and the night before that, 19. The numbers were going down. I noted it on the clipboard and returned to the sales floor. At 2:12 a.m., the woman's voice came over the radio. "Help me, please. I'm stuck in here and I can't get out. Someone please help." The voice was calm, almost conversational, the way you'd ask for directions or the time. But it wasn't on channel 4. It was coming through clear as day, but I hadn't changed the channel, hadn't touched the dial. The voice was just there. Rule 15. Do not respond to any radio transmission that addresses you by your full name. Respond only to badge number or shift role. Rule 23. If the store radio system broadcasts a message in a voice you do not recognize, turn off your personal radio immediately. I turned off the radio, counted to 60, turned it back on, and confirmed channel 4. The voice was gone. I radioed Marcus. Badge 7406 reporting. Heard an unfamiliar voice on the radio at 2:12, followed protocol 23. Copy, stay on task. I stayed on task. At 2:40 a.m., the lights in the grocery section flickered again. 32 seconds of irregular pulses, then steady. This wasn't the scheduled 3 a.m. flicker. This was something else. I noted the time and kept moving. At 3 a.m., the scheduled flicker happened on time, 38 seconds, same as always. 2 flickers in one night. That hadn't happened before. At 3:14 a.m., I passed ISIL 19. The ceiling tiles above the aisle were visible in my peripheral vision, square white panels, same as everywhere else in the store. But one of them looked wrong, not broken, not displaced, just different. A slightly darker shade, maybe, or a slightly different texture. I couldn't tell without looking directly, and the rules said to stay on the right side of the aisle, not to stand directly beneath them. I walked the right side of ISIL 19. I didn't look up. At 4 a.m., the inventory count read 15 pallets, a drop of 1 from the previous check. I noted it on the clipboard and stood in the stockroom staring at the numbers. 19, 18, 17, 16, 15. Something was taking pallets. Not many, not quickly, but steadily, one at a time, and I didn't know where they were going. I radioed Marcus. 4 a.m. count is 15, down from 16. How many total since your first count tonight? First count was 17, so 2 down. That's within range. Note it and continue. I noted it and continued. At 4:32 a.m., I finished stocking aisle 22. Per the rules, I returned to the stockroom to wait. The loading dock door was sealed, yellow tape unbroken. The pallets, 15 of them, stood in orderly rows along the back wall. The fluorescent lights hummed. Everything was quiet. I sat on the same overturned crate I always used and watched the clock. At 5:15, the footsteps started again. They came from outside the dock door. The same slow, measured pace I'd heard before. Left to right across the length of the door, then right to left, then left to right again. Back and forth, like someone pacing while they thought through a problem. I counted the passes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. At the 7th pass, the footsteps stopped. For a long moment, there was nothing. Just the hum of the lights and the soft tick of the clock and the faint drip of rain from the gutters outside. Then a voice, low and distorted, like someone speaking through a broken speaker, said my name. My full name. First, middle, and last. I didn't respond. I didn't move. I sat on the crate and stared at the door and waited. The voice said my name again, then a third time, then silence. At 5:30, Marcus's voice came over the radio. "Clear floor." "Copy clear," I said. The voice didn't come back. Marcus met me at the time clock. His face was gray, the color of the sky before a storm that hasn't broken yet. "You heard it," he said. "Yeah." "What did it say?" "My name, 3 times. He nodded slowly. "That's new. It usually only says first names." "What does that mean?" Marcus looked at me for a long moment. His eyes were steady, but something behind them, something that usually held firm, had loosened. "It means it's learning," he said. I drove to the motel that morning and didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed with the curtains drawn and the TV on mute and thought about the voice at the loading dock. My full name. First, middle, and last. I had never told anyone at the store my middle name. It wasn't on my badge or my paperwork or my locker. The only place it existed was on my driver's license, which I kept in my wallet, which I kept in my pocket, which never left my body during a shift. The voice had known anyway. I thought about quitting again. But the math hadn't changed. Cincinnati meant debt and failure. Harlan County meant rules and survival. The voice had said my name, but I had followed the rules, and I was still here. I went back to work. On my 33rd shift, Marcus gave me a new document. It was longer than the others. A full page of single-spaced text, printed on white paper and laminated. "This is the master list," he said. "Everything from the past year, consolidated. Read it tonight. Memorize what you can. When you're done, you're going to be training someone." I read it in the break room. The rules were familiar. I'd learned most of them over the past 7 weeks. But seeing them all in one place, numbered and organized, gave them a weight they hadn't had before. 1. Clock in no earlier than 9:45 p.m. and no later than 9:55 p.m. If you are late, do not enter the building. 2. Verify that your radio is set to channel 4. Do not change channels. 3. The store closes at 10 p.m. Do not unlock any exterior door after 10:15 p.m. until 5:45 a.m. 4. Between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., the public restrooms are off limits. Use only the employee restroom near the loading dock. If you hear knocking from inside a closed restroom, do not respond and do not investigate. 5. Inventory, the stockroom at midnight, 2 a.m., and 4 a.m. Count pallets, not boxes. If the count decreases by more than 2 between any check, radio the supervisor immediately. If the count increases, leave the stockroom and radio from the sales floor. 6. Between 1:40 a.m. and 1:55 a.m., remain in the center aisles. Do not approach any exterior wall, window, or door. Do not look toward the parking lot. 7. If the power fails, go directly to the manager's office. Close the door. Wait for the generator. 8. The garden center greenhouse is locked from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Do not enter. Do not approach the glass. If you see someone inside after hours, do not acknowledge them. 9. Stock shelves in numerical aisle. Order only. Aisle 1 through aisle 22. Do not skip aisles. Do not backtrack. 10. Between 3 a.m. and 3:20 a.m., the overhead lights in the grocery section will flicker. This is normal. 11. If a customer approaches you after 10 p.m., do not assist them. Direct them to the front registers and radio the supervisor. 12. Do not accept any item handed to you by someone you do not recognize as a scheduled employee. 13. The loading dock door must remain closed unless a scheduled delivery arrives. Deliveries occur only on Tuesdays and Fridays. 14. At 5:30 a.m., the supervisor will announce "clear floor" over the radio. Respond with "copy clear." Do not leave until you hear and speak this exchange. 15. Do not respond to any radio transmission that addresses you by your full name. 16. If you see a shopping cart in the parking lot after midnight, do not retrieve it. 17. Do not stand directly beneath the ceiling tiles above aisle 19 between midnight and 4 a.m. 18. Any employee not seen for more than 45 minutes should be located via radio before being approached. 19. Between 2 a.m. and 2:30 a.m., the electronic price scanners may activate spontaneously. Do not investigate. 20. If you hear a child's voice anywhere in the store after closing, do not respond. Radio the supervisor immediately and proceed to the manager's office. 21. If a staff member becomes unresponsive during the center aisle window, do not approach until the window has closed. Wait at least 15 minutes. 22. In a power failure lasting more than 90 seconds, seal the gap beneath the office door using 3 strips of tape. Do not leave until power is restored. 23. If the radio broadcasts a message in an unfamiliar voice, turn off your radio for 60 seconds, then confirm channel 4. 24. During a power failure, if the circling footsteps exceed 10 circuits, remain in the office until dawn. 25. If you hear your full name spoken by an unidentified voice, do not respond. Radio the supervisor using your badge number only. 26. At the 4 a.m. inventory count, if the pallet number is less than 14, do not leave the stockroom until 5 a.m. Radio the supervisor and wait. 27. If you observe a Walmart employee you do not recognize, note their badge number and appearance. Do not approach. Radio the supervisor with details. 28. During a storm, all emergency protocols remain in effect, regardless of other conditions. Assume the worst. I finished reading and folded the sheet into my vest pocket. The trainee was arriving tomorrow. Another new hire, another person who would need to learn the rules, another body to stand between the store and whatever circled its perimeter at night. Her name was Jenna, 28 years old, recently relocated from Knoxville, looking for stable work in a bad economy. She had clear eyes and a firm handshake, and the look of someone who had handled difficult jobs before, and expected this one to be the same. I showed her the locker room, the break room, the sales floor. I gave her the laminated sheet and watched her read it, her expression shifting from polite attention to quiet confusion, to something that might have been fear. "These are the rules," I said. "Don't question them. Don't improvise. Follow them exactly, and you'll be fine. And if I don't follow them..." I thought about Kyle, standing in aisle 2 with empty eyes. I thought about the woman in the greenhouse waving through the glass. I thought about the voice that had said my name 3 times at the loading dock. "Then you won't be fine." The first week of training went smoothly. Jenna learned fast. She had the kind of mind that absorbed procedures and repeated them without embellishment. By her 3rd shift, she could recite the rules in order from memory. By her 5th shift, she was stocking faster than I had at the same stage. On her 7th shift, she asked me about the footsteps. "I heard them during the blackout drill," she said. "We were in the stockroom, finishing the midnight count, 14 pallets, lower than I would have liked, but still within the acceptable range." Circling the office, "Marcus said you've heard them too." "Yeah." "What are they?" I set the clipboard on the nail by the dock door and turned to face her. "I don't know," I said. "I've never seen what makes them. I just know that if you follow the rules, they stay outside. If you don't follow the rules..." "What?" I thought about Kyle again, about the way his eyes had gone empty, about the transfer notice to Ohio, which might have been true, or might have been a story someone told to fill the silence. "I don't know," I said, "but I don't want to find out." She nodded slowly. Her eyes were steady, not scared exactly, but careful. The kind of look you develop when you realize that the world is larger and stranger than you thought, and the only safe response is precision. "I'll follow the rules," she said. I believed her. On my 42nd shift, the numbers dropped below 14. It was 4 a.m., the final inventory count of the night. I walked the stockroom with my flashlight, counting the pallets along the back wall. 12, 13. I counted again. Still 13. Rule 26. At the 4 a.m. inventory count, if the pallet number is less than 14, do not leave the stockroom until 5 a.m. Radio the supervisor and wait. I radioed Marcus. Badge 7406. 4 a.m. count is 13. Waiting in the stockroom per protocol 26. Copy. Stay by the dock door. I'll be there at 5. I stayed by the dock door. The yellow seal tape was intact. The fluorescent lights hummed. The pallets, 13 of them, sat in their orderly rows, casting long shadows on the concrete floor. At 4:23 a.m., I heard something in the stockroom. Not footsteps, not a voice, something else. A soft rustling, like fabric brushing against cardboard, coming from somewhere near the back of the space. I turned my flashlight toward the sound. Nothing moved. The pallets were still. The shadows were still. The rustling came again, closer this time, maybe 30 feet away. I didn't leave the dock door. I didn't investigate. I stood with my back to the seal and my flashlight pointed at the rows of merchandise and waited. At 4:31 a.m., the rustling stopped. At 4:58 a.m., Marcus knocked on the stockroom door. 3 short taps, then 2 long. I let him in. 13 pallets, I said. And there was a sound at 4:23, rustling near the back. I didn't investigate. He nodded. Good. Did you see anything? No. He walked the stockroom, checking each row, shining his flashlight into the corners and beneath the shelves. When he came back, his expression was neutral, but his voice was tighter than usual. There's a 14th pallet now, he said. I looked. He was right. 14 pallets, arranged in the same rows I'd counted 3 times. I hadn't seen it arrive. I hadn't heard it move. It was just there. How is that possible? I asked. Marcus shook his head. Don't know, but the count's back in range. That's what matters. I didn't ask any more questions. I clocked out at 5:42 and drove to the motel. The pallet bothered me for days. I ran through the possibilities. Miscounting, fatigue, some kind of delivery I hadn't noticed. But none of them made sense. I had counted 13, and then there were 14. Something had added a pallet while I was watching. Or something had always been there, and I just hadn't been able to see it until it was ready. I kept working. The rules were the same. The shifts were the same. The footsteps still circled the office during blackouts. The knocking still came from the restrooms at 11:30. The woman still stood in the greenhouse every few nights, waving at anyone who walked past the garden center gate. Jenna trained well. By her 3rd week, she was working solo shifts, following the rules with the same mechanical precision that had kept me alive for 2 months. Marcus said she was the best trainee he'd had in years. Better than me, better than Kyle, better than the half-dozen people who had cycled through the position before them. I didn't know where those people were now. I didn't ask. On my 51st shift, I made my final preparations. I knew the job was temporary. I had always known. The debt would be paid by spring, and then I would have options. A different job, a different city, a different life. But before I left, I needed to make sure the rules survived. Someone had written them for me, and I would write them for someone else. I spent the early hours of the shift transcribing the master list onto fresh paper, adding notes where the original wording was unclear. I included details Marcus had taught me, the patterns of the footsteps, the timing of the flickers, the specific shade of yellow on the seal tape that meant the door hadn't been opened. I wrote about Kyle and the woman in the greenhouse and the voice that had said my name at the loading dock. At 5 a.m., I put the papers in an envelope and left it in my locker. Whoever came after me would find it. They would read the rules and memorize them and follow them the same way I had. And they would survive the same way I had. At 5:30, Marcus's voice came over the radio. "Clear floor." "Copy clear," I said. I clocked out and walked to the parking lot. The sun was rising behind Pine Mountain, pale and cold through the winter haze. My car was where I'd left it, in the back row near the garden center. The greenhouse was visible through the chain-link gate, dark, quiet, empty. I got in the car and started the engine. The radio hummed with static for a moment, then cleared to a country station playing a song about back roads and losing someone. I pulled out of the parking lot and drove south toward the motel. In the rearview mirror, I could see the store growing smaller. A concrete rectangle in a gravel lot, lights buzzing in the early morning, ordinary and unremarkable. A place where nothing unusual could afford to happen. I didn't look back. 3 months later, I left Harlan County. The debt was paid, the job was done, and spring was breaking over the mountains. I packed my duffel bag and cleaned out my locker and said goodbye to Marcus, who shook my hand without speaking and gave me a single nod that meant more than any words could have. Jenna was still there. She had made it through the winter without incident. No breaches, no near misses, no moments where the rules bent and almost broke. She was better at this job than I had been. She understood, in a way I never quite managed, that the rules weren't restrictions. They were protection. A wall between us and whatever circled the building in the dark. I left her the envelope. She found it in her locker on her next shift. The master list, the notes, the details no one else had written down. I never found out if she read it. I never found out if she passed it on. But I think she did. I think she understood that the rules only work if they survive. If each person who learns them teaches the next person, and the next, and the next. A chain stretching back to whenever this started and forward to whenever it ends. I got on a bus headed east and watched the mountains shrink in the window. The road wound through towns I'd never heard of, past churches and diners and gas stations that looked like they hadn't changed since 1978. Somewhere behind me, Store 4412 was opening for the day. Customers filing through the automatic doors, carts rolling across the linoleum, the ordinary machinery of commerce ticking along as if nothing had ever been wrong. And somewhere in that store, someone was preparing for the night shift, reading the rules, memorizing the times, learning the procedures that would keep them safe until dawn. I didn't know their name. I didn't need to. They would follow the rules, and they would survive. That's how it works.